understanding Bible truth on tithe and tithing. As a pastor, my responsibility is to teach on every subject of scripture so I can bring you understanding. It's critical to observe that Brother Paul never mentioned the word tithe in all of his epistles, in all of the Pauline theology. Yet it's a huge subject in the church world today. I'm telling you, very huge, very big subject. All right, now 2 Timothy chapter 3 verse number 16. All scripture is given by inspiration of God and is profitable for doctrine, for reproof, for correction, for instruction in righteousness. For instruction in righteousness. So basically, teaching is explanation. Teaching is explanation. So we teach from the Old Testament, the scriptures, the Old Testament, and teaching is possible from the Old Testament. Then from teaching we will have reproof, which is evidence. That is, teaching gives us reproof or evidence. And from reproof we will have correction, and from correction we will have instruction in righteousness, which is actually spiritual growth. One important thing about the Old Testament which you must do is to learn to read the Old Testament. You know, Jesus in Matthew's Gospel chapter number 12 verse number 2. But when the Pharisees saw it, they said unto him, Behold, thy disciples do that which is not lawful to do upon the Sabbath day. Next verse. But he said unto them, Have you not read what David did when he was an hungered, and they that were with him? Not what David said, but what David did. Look at verse 5. Or have you not read in the law how that on the Sabbath days the priests in the temple profane the Sabbath and are blameless? Look at verse number 7 and 8. But if you had known what this meaneth, I will have mercy and not sacrifice, you will not have condemned the guiltless. Verse 8. For the Son of Man is Lord even of the Sabbath day. So he talks about reading the word. Have you not read the Greek word anaginosko? Have you not read? It doesn't mean to glance. It means to actually read and pay attention to what you're reading. The pastor can teach you, but you have the responsibility to read. If you read, for example, the subject of the tithe, all that was needed was for Christians over the years to just read. Just read. Don't take everything hook, line, and sinker that you're told. Check you have a copy of the book. Just read. And you know, we saw that the tithe was never money. The tithe was food. Some people say because there was no money, that's why they were asked to give food. And we debunked that very clearly yesterday from scripture, that when they were asked to give food as tithe, there was money. And there were other professions apart from farming in Israel. Tithing was never money at any time in scripture. Never money. And Jesus never spoke about tithe as money. Look at Matthew chapter 23 verse 23. Let's look at Jesus' commentary. Woe unto you, scribes and Pharisees, hypocrites, for you pay tithe of mint and anise and cumin. Those are the three articles that Jesus factored out as their tithe. Mint, which is herbs, anise, which is herbs, and cumin, which is like curry. These are kitchen elements, and have omitted the weightier matters of the law: judgment, mercy, and faith. This ought ye to have done, and not to leave the order undone. So Jesus said that tithing was a matter of the law. We had tithe before the law. Genesis chapter 14, verse 17 to 20. Then we also saw the tithe during the law. During the law, Leviticus chapter number 27. Then we saw tithing in the four Gospels. Of course, we read Matthew 23:23, Luke chapter 11, verse 42, and Luke chapter 18, verse 10 to 13. Then we also saw tithe mentioned in the book of Hebrews. So column 1 before the law, column 2 Exodus to Malachi, column 3 the four Gospels, column 4 the epistles. All right, so we saw tithe in the book of Hebrews, in Hebrews chapter 7, verse 1 to 17. Now we said that column 2 and 3, which is Exodus to Malachi, and Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, column 2 and 3, the Old Testament and the four Gospels, we are the same, because Jesus said it was a matter of the law. And the law was given by Moses. And since tithe preceded the law, we cannot say Jesus was quoting Abraham, because Abraham didn't have law. So we can only group 2 and 3, Exodus, Malachi, four Gospels together. We began to look at the fourth group, which is Hebrews chapter 7. And so we can say that the fourth column, since it refers to Genesis 14, which is the first, so we can merge number 1 and number 4, first and fourth column as one, and 2 and 3 as 2. Most of what we are doing here, apart from tithing, is to also be able to dissolve doubts. To dissolve doubts. For example, people have spoken about Abel, and there's even a more damnable one than Abel's own. I have had actually a well-respected global man of God. I was in the conference myself, not that they told me, not video. I was physically in the conference somewhere in America. Mama and I were there in that conference, and the man of God came up to preach one of the sessions, and I was in shock. He said, you know, the sin of Adam and Eve was that they touched the tithe. They touched the tithe. That the fall of man is that they touch the tithe. I was taken off.